not only do you have to accomplish the work, but you have to, help them understand, like kind of sell why the work you're doing is valuable, what impact it's having.
So, Alec, what are the challenges that you see for people trying to get into software engineering today or to find the next role in software engineering?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest challenge that I see in general is that people who are interested in software give up the learning process too early. Software can be a difficult field to get into, and part of it for anybody is going through some degree of struggle when things get difficult, like you might not know how to code something or what the proper design should be. And I think if people understood that some degree of struggle is part of the learning process, then then they could persevere. And software isn't for everybody. Not everybody will ultimately enjoy it, but I think if it's something you're interested in, you should give it sort of the due consideration, and understand that it's normal for people to struggle. I've been in the industry for over 10 years, and I still struggle with things all the time. There's always something new to learn, and to seek out guidance, whether it's through mentorship or through friends or through colleagues you're working with. Yeah, so I think that's sort of the biggest gotcha there.
Yeah, I think you're right. A lot of things in life, people are seeking that instant gratification, and most hard things in life just don't come like that. You have to put the time in. If you want to lose weight, you've got to diet and exercise for a while. It doesn't just happen overnight. You don't just decide to do it and get that instant satisfaction. You want to lift heavy weights, you have to go to the gym and lift progressively heavier weights. You start small and build up, don't you? You've got to put that work in and not give up too early.
Yeah, and another thing that I see very commonly, and I see this especially in the realm of tutoring, where I'm involved with a lot, is that people, especially starting out, they really want to know, what language should I learn, which technology should I learn, to make it most likely that I'll get a job or something like that. And sort of the real answer to that question is, it doesn't matter much as long as somebody is interested in that skill set. So when people ask me, what do I do? What do I want to use? My advice to them is actually, um, you know, put up some job boards on your screen for some software jobs. Take a look at what some of them require, and maybe pick just one thing that might interest you, a skill that seems like something you might want to do, and just try to start learning it. And if the job board approach doesn't work, then I also suggest to see if people that friends or people in your network who might be in software, what they do, and talk with them about what's interesting to them, what they work on, and see if there's something you want to learn. But I think a lot of people get nervous that if they pick the wrong thing to start, that it'll be sort of wasted time or wasted effort. But the reality is that that's not true. Learning is great. And, even if it's not a language you ultimately want to use, you can carry those lessons forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you learn to program Python, you're still learning loops, you're still learning functions, you're still learning how to process these data structures, you're still learning about lists and dictionaries or and I think you're absolutely right. I've given people the same advice that don't focus on what's the perfect language. Look at what the job adverts are for the place that you want to work. So if you're remote, look at the job adverts, pick something interesting. If you're happy to commute and there's a local big town, look at what the demand is in the local town. I mean, for example, I'm near Bath in the UK, and a few years ago I got asked this question quite a lot, and people said, should I learn C++ or should I learn JavaScript? And my answer was very much, do you want to work in Bath or do you want to work in London? Because C++, loads of jobs in London, finance, it's a big skill set. Out in Bath, you'll be looking at web development. So pick your stack to suit where you're going to be and the
Right.
demand that's in your local market.
Yeah. No, so absolutely. And, when I was starting out, I pretty much only knew C++. Like that's what I had learned in school. And I viewed myself that way. That's what I got hired into my first role doing. And I pretty much knew nothing else. Maybe I had done a small amount of functional programming in school. But yeah, but the reality was, I discovered quickly that if I wanted to stay relevant, I had to, try to learn whatever was needed for the role. Or when I later got into freelancing, I learned some other skill sets. So I think, the best advice that I could possibly give that will be more timeless is sort of, be open to the evolution of technologies and to different kinds of languages, and just sort of like, and it comes with practice, but trying to get comfortable exploring different skill sets. And that's especially a large thing with the advent of AI. But I'm sure that's something we can get into later as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about finding different roles. A lot of people talk about how you can use your network to find roles and how you can make use of networking. What's your take on networking?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing about networking, I think a lot of people view it as this transactional interaction where you sort of say like, I need a job, can you help me? And they're like, yeah, maybe. And then because of that, I think a lot of people get discouraged when they don't get the answers they want. But I like to take more of a mentality of curiosity. So rather than it being purely transactional, I try to figure out, what are you doing? Like, why do you like this? Here is what I'm interested in and what kind of skill set I think I can bring. And and I try to offer some small degree of value to everyone I reach out to, even if I'm new in a field. It's even as simple as gratitude or like, thank you for your time, and this is what I think I might be interested in. But yeah, I think, as long as you're respectful of people's time with you and you're genuinely curious and you think you can genuinely bring some degree of value to that conversation, that it can be just like any other conversation with anybody. Like, networking doesn't have to be this, very formal thing. I go to tech events in my area and just sort of talk with people and learn what they're doing, and that works great often later for, business things if they come up. But, if not, you've made a good friend.
Yeah, and you're right. So many people mistake it for this transactional thing that you do it when you need it, and then you look for the transaction, you look for the trade off. Where what you've nicely demonstrated there is you're going to local events, you're building that network that you may never need, that you're building in advance. You're meeting people, building connections with them, building relationships with them, getting to know them. They now know you, know you're available, know what you have. You know a little bit about them. And again, don't know what it's been like for you, Hope, but for me, I used to go to in-person networking events when I worked in London, or when I was working in the office. I went to a couple of conferences, and there are people I met at conferences 25 years ago that I'm still friends with and have been colleagues with several times. A few of them, they have introduced me to jobs or introduced me to work and brought me in as a consultant or contractor, and vice versa. I brought some of them into different roles. So that network has been very powerful over the years.
Yeah, absolutely.
How's your experience been like with that?
Yeah, it's been great. So, I try to go to like in-person events in the cities near me, like at least twice a month. I really enjoy that. And I do work remotely, so I like to go to some in-person events. But yeah, it's wonderful. I always learn something new. I mean, you can learn so much by kind of being online and seeing what the trends are, but I think there's also something different you can get out of, seeing a group of people in person, what they're working on, or if there's somebody speaking at that event, like getting exposed to a new technology. And it's always a great learning experience. And I love talking with people there, and they, sometimes find value from what I have to offer as well. So, and that's something that develops over time. Don't worry if you think just starting out, like you don't really know anything about going on. Like I said, if you cultivate that mindset of curiosity, then I think that's the best you can do.
Yeah, I saw you also had quite a unique take on how you should network with hiring managers when you're interviewing. Can you tell us a bit more about that, please, Eric?
Yeah, sure. So I think, so one advice I've been seeing lately is sort of doing cold outreach to hiring managers, which can sometimes work, like doing that to hiring managers and recruiters. Um, I think what I would do if I was actually job searching today is I would kind of like, especially if they're someone who maybe posts content, like start um, kind of like giving value added comments to that content, like something maybe insightful that you found from it, and start to get to know and develop a relationship with the person. You can also ask about a specific role, but I think the goal there is like, definitely don't just like send your resume if you've never talked to them before and be like, I'm interested in this role. But it's definitely okay to send a message and say what you think what you think you can bring to that role. And as long as you're friendly about it and you kind of like genuinely offer something, there's no harm in reaching out that way.
Cool. And the other thing I saw that you talk about recently was reaching out to hiring managers after you didn't get the job and building a relationship with
Yes.
them then.
Yeah,
Talk to me a bit more
absolutely.
about that approach.
Yeah. So, as often happens, there's an interview process that occurs, and either if you're the candidate, maybe you don't get the offer, or maybe if you're the company that makes the offer, then the candidate might turn down the offer. So, what happened with me was I had interviewed for a role a couple of years before I started it, and I'd gotten an offer for an open role there, and I had turned it down, politely, but at the time it wasn't a great fit. But over those couple of years following, I kept a sort of positive relationship with the talent acquisition person from that company, and then unfortunately, back in 2023, I'd gotten laid off, so I was open to work, and part of what I did was I reached out to this talent acquisition person from that company, and they said, we actually do have an open role. It's a little different from the one that you interviewed for prior, but um, and then essentially, since they got to know me already, I was able to do a final round interview, and I got the offer, and I started working there. So so there's no harm in doing that. I think a lot of people feel shame from, like, if something doesn't work out, you think severed the relationship, but that's not really what happens. As long as you're respectful and keep up good ties, then anything's possible.
Yeah, I also liked your advice to kind of reach out to people when you got turned down, when maybe another candidate got chosen, and try and leverage that relationship from people that have just interviewed you, just seen you put your best foot forward, I think, as you phrased it. And they can maybe be your champion, maybe they can introduce you. And if you reach out and build that relationship, you've got the start of something there, and you never know where it'll lead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I have posted on LinkedIn about how a lot of people are always like looking for references, people who have seen them doing their work or at their best. And I think if you've gone for, say, a 5 round interview process, and you've performed really well, and again, maybe the role didn't work out for whatever reason, but if you sort of felt like you had a good performance, and you had a good connection with people from there after, then who's a better reference than someone who's seen you like interviewing at your best. That's one of the best sources.
Yeah, absolutely. And who knows, they might know other hiring managers within the same organization that they can refer you on to. And that might just be the thing that tips them over the edge and thinking, hey, this person's a great guy. They weren't quite the fit for my role, but they're really keen, they're enthusiastic, they're positive, they've got a great attitude. So, yeah, they might refer you to a friend in a different company or same company. You never know, do you?
Absolutely.
And some of the best results of my life have come from those opportune moments where you've built that relationship and something happens further down the line that you weren't necessarily expecting. As you say, it's not transactional, it's about building a genuine relationship.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing I like to think about there too is, just as I or you, hope that opportunities present themselves to us, I feel good knowing that if I try to be valuable to other people, I can make them feel the way that I feel when I get a good opportunity. And that's a lot of the reason that I started sort of like posting on LinkedIn in the first place, was because, when I got laid off, I sort of did what I knew how to do, and I hadn't, like most people, I hadn't logged on to LinkedIn in a while, and I was like, I'm open to work. Unfortunately, this has happened, and people were very helpful, and that was great. But I felt bad because I hadn't like really offered value to any of those people. I was just kind of asking for something, and then so that's kind of what led me to want to like post on LinkedIn, and try to give my learnings to other people, so that hopefully maybe they can get from me what I got when I was in a tough situation.
Cool. That's a great approach to take. And I'm sure that a lot of the good advice that I've seen you posting has been helping many people. Has that post on LinkedIn also helped you? Has it led to other opportunities?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, I've been probably consistently doing it at this point for like a couple of years now, and I've met wonderful people like yourself, and I've met community of tech people. I've met people in a variety of domains, and it's been so rewarding and so amazing. Like whether it's opportunities like business wise, or talking on shows like this, or just if you keep at it and try to make those genuine connections with people, like try to add what value you can. If you're consistent, then you'll kind of find your people, um, and it's great. I've really enjoyed it, and so much has changed in the last couple of years that since I started posting consistently, for sure.
I like the way you put that with you'll find your people. I mean, that's one of the things that algorithms on social media are quite good for, aren't they? They can bring together like-minded people. So if you've got, doesn't have to be a controversial opinion, but if you've got a strong opinion, people can recognize you, and you can kind of lead to that congregation and that recognizing of, hey, there's somebody that thinks like me, there's somebody I can relate to. And you, as you say, you can find your people like you. And that's a good basis to build on.
Yeah, no, exactly. And people can tell when you've posted from the heart and things that you really feel strongly about, rather than just posting something that you think sounds professional, for sure. So
Yeah, it's always that balance, isn't it? It feels it's a professional network. You feel you should be a little bit professional, but we all buy from people. We hire people. We don't hire somebody that turns up, excuse me, looking very professional and formal to an interview, do we? We hire the person and think, oh, they have the right knowledge, and we'd like working with them. We'd get on with them. They'd fit in the team. We don't want the people that we say, well, technically they're brilliant, but everyone would hate working with them.
right, right. Yeah, and another thing that I find, and people ask me this a lot at the in-person events, when they say, I want to start posting, I just, I don't know if I have any expertise, and like I don't know if people will listen to me. And one thing I say is, especially if they're in tech, I say, just post about something you're working on. Like it doesn't have to be this finished product. A lot of posts of mine that have gotten the most attention are from things that I'm currently working on, but maybe I haven't finished yet, because people can relate to the experience of what you're currently learning. So like getting started is often the hardest part, and it definitely was for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think it's true for everyone, isn't it? It's that fear of the unknown. I think that's great advice as well, to just start posting and post about what you're working on, because we forget that no matter where we are on our journey, there's always somebody that's behind us in the journey. So whether you're 6 months into being a software engineer, 6 years, maybe not 60 years, but you get the idea.
Yeah, yeah.
There's always something that's behind you. And if you look at the number of software engineers, I think when I started, the estimates are there was 500,000 to 1 million software engineers worldwide. There's now 28 million, I think, and predictions that it will be 35 million by the end of this decade. Again, that's growing fast. That's an increasing industry. So there are always more people behind you that don't know what you've already learned than there are people ahead of you. And it's going to keep being that way. So if you can help those people behind you and share your experience, and even it's as you say, this is what I'm building and this is the mistakes I've made and the lessons I've learned. Yeah, okay, maybe somebody that's been doing it for 30 years will already know those. Maybe they're not, because they've worked in a different area. But
Right.
somebody that's just behind you, it could be the revelation for them that gives them that next couple of steps forward and helps them progress.
Yeah, and on that note too, I think another thing that I definitely realized like later on in posting is that I think a lot of people think when they post something on LinkedIn, like everybody will see it and understand it forever. Like if you post about something one time, people will like that's the only time you can post about that. You have to post about something super different every single time. But the reality is, I think the statistic is something like only 10% of the people who are connected to you might even see a post that you put out. And so it's definitely not a bad thing if you like emphasize the same message in a different way on different occasions. I certainly haven't only posted once for several of my messages. But yeah, I think that's another thing. I think people think if they keep posting, it always has to be something new, and they might burn out if they always think they have to come up with new ideas. But some of that energy can instead be refocused on, maybe how can I like tweak this initial message to say it a different way, or maybe communicate to like a different aspect of people I want to talk with. So I think that's important too, and I've learned that over time.
Yeah, I think you're right on a couple of points there. Firstly, definitely, I would expect that somewhere between 5 and 10% of your audience will have seen each of your posts. People are on holiday, they're away, they're not checking LinkedIn that day, whatever. A small percentage of your audience is going to see it. If your audience is growing, so 6 months later, you might have nobody around that's following you that actually saw that original post. The other thing, as you say, you don't have to not post on that topic or just post on it once. To put my kind of marketing hat on, as somebody that's run a business for a few years, the statistic for marketing is that somebody needs to see your marketing message 7 times to remember it. So the chances are, even if they did see your post, they're wandering around thinking about themselves, thinking about their own day, thinking about, their pull request or their bad code review or their deadline that's coming or their sick kid or the difficult in the relationship or just any of the multitude of other things that could be stressing them in their life. They're not thinking about the thing that we posted that we thought was
Right.
special and important. So they might not even recognize that we talked about that topic until they see the 7th, 8th, 9th post that we make on that.
Yeah, and I mean, and I've seen people who are very successful on LinkedIn. There's somebody I follow who actually not only do they repeat posts, but their entire success is based on basically repurposing a single post in several different ways. And like that's what they do every single day. Like they talk about the same thing, but phrased in different ways. So, not saying that's what everybody has to do, but that can work for some people. But, I think the message there is that, some repetition repurposing is not a bad thing if it makes sense. I sometimes like to create different kinds of posts, so I like to vary it up, but just the act of repeating in itself is not a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I also saw that you talked recently about coffee chats. I've been doing a lot of coffee chats with people recently and focusing more in-person networking, get to know people. I saw that you had a little kind of anti-coffee chat rant.
Hmm. Yeah, no,
What's the
my
beef with coffee
yeah.
chats?
No, it's funny. So yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out because so starting out on LinkedIn, I do recognize like a lot of people go to an online venue like that for networking because so they can like type back and forth to each other and not necessarily have to worry about kind of like one-on-one real-time chats. And for a while that's how I felt. And I said, oh, like all these people are asking me for coffee chats, like what's going on? I mean, I was always respectful with those people, but I'm like, I, I, I think at the time, one of my biggest things was especially since like a lot of what I do is like work with clients on an hourly basis, I was trying to justify to myself, like, why would I take a meeting where like, where I'm not getting paid? Like I'd basically be saying no to a potential paying client and have this like sort of free discussion. And I think there's still some merit to that, but at the same time, I realized that there's something talking one-on-one real time that it does that just typing back and forth can't quite replicate, and often like talking with someone for free could lead to like a business collaboration down the line, even if that immediate time frame isn't like nothing's being exchanged during that time. So I think my views on that have definitely evolved over time, and now I'm not like huge on coffee chats just because I'm an introvert and I need to like rest my energy, but I do them, when I can, when I think they're good discussions to be had with people. Like I've like people that I've met at events or on LinkedIn, I've often talked with one on one. Yeah, so I think the main message was also that you don't have to accept every meeting, especially if you value your time. But if you think it could lead to a good collaboration between you and the other person, then it makes sense to do that.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance to strike, isn't it? If I accepted every invite I got, I would do nothing but coffee chats all day. I'm sure I'd have fun meeting some great people, but you still got to earn a living, haven't we? We still got to do the day job, so it's difficult to find that. So you mentioned mentoring as well, and I've seen you on a platform called CodeMentor, which I've vaguely heard of but not come across before.
Yeah.
So what is CodeMentor, and what are you doing on there, Eric?
Yeah, so that particular, so there are several different kinds of platforms. So I got involved in freelancing probably like sometime over 6 or 7 years ago, and CodeMentor in particular, I like that platform because once you get into doing freelancing there, like a lot of the platforms, you need to sort of like almost buy your way to applying to jobs. Like you need to get like connects on Upwork or something like that. But on CodeMentor, once you're certifying sort of show that you're able to help people, you can reach out to any person on there who needs help that you think you could help them as well. So it's almost like a list of people, and it's been really great so far. I'm actually relatively new to that platform in particular. Um, but yeah, so freelancing, like typically, typically I do a mix between sort of like, what you would think of as traditional freelancing, where you sort of like take on a project for somebody, complete it, and do it by a milestone. But I also enjoy like the tutoring aspect, where you can like be live with people, and I often learn as much from students when I do that as they hopefully learn from me. And um, but yeah, it can be great, and I think especially people in the software industry who might be between jobs, I think it can be really valuable to consider like trying freelancing. Even if it's not necessarily something you think you'll do long term, it can be a great way to keep your skill set up and to figure out other things you might enjoy beyond the regular roles you might have done.
Cool. So did you say Code Mentor is certifying people, so they're verifying that you have the knowledge?
Yeah, yeah. So I think I had to show, so like for me, I said I had like a master's and a bachelor's, like centered around computer science, and they like checked that. Yeah, because tutoring in general and freelancing is surprisingly like very unregulated. Pretty much anybody can claim that they're a tutor or freelancer. And um, so I think another thing, like a lot of people ask me about, getting involved in mentorship or tutoring as a business, and a lot of people are concerned that like there are so many people in that space that it might seem saturated, or that there are like too many tutors and mentors. But the reality is that just like in anything else, quality is an asset. Um, so I like to say that like when I tutor, probably over half my clients that I worked with regularly in the last year have told me that they sought me out after another tutor or mentor didn't work out for them. Um, so even if there seem to be a lot of tutors and freelancers, the fact of the matter is that putting that quality into it still is a differentiator. And so don't get discouraged about like the amount of people. And I think I would kind of give similar advice about the job market. Like a lot of people say the job market's saturated, but when you're applying, say on LinkedIn, a lot of those numbers are from people whose resumes don't even remotely fit the role. So yeah, so I have some interesting views there on like saturation as well, of markets and things.
Yeah, I've never sat the other side of a LinkedIn advert, but I've been a hiring manager enough time and seen the sheer volume of CVs. Even back in the days when we struggled to find people, the sheer volume of CVs you get that are totally inappropriate for the role. So it's always a challenge to sift through them. So you talked about mentoring quality there, and how people have sought you out after they've tried another mentor. So I can imagine that some of that is quality. Some people just don't have what it takes to mentor people. It is a different skill set, and it's one that I think you improve over practice. But also, sometimes there's a personality mismatch, isn't there, as well? I think I would struggle to mentor certain personality types because of how I am. So, what do you feel is the aspects of quality that perhaps you're bringing that you'd see some people missing in that mentoring journey?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's a couple of different things. So one, I think is a lot of people in the tutoring space, might still be students, like an undergraduate, or sometimes maybe even a high schooler might be tutoring, and some tutors just don't yet have the life experience that like some other tutors might have, and I think initially, and there's research to back this up, but initially when people seek out mentorship and tutoring, of course, cost is a huge factor, and often those services that cost the least are, with the people who might be the least experienced at it. So that's one thing. And there can be personality mismatches, but I find that can deal with that on a case by case basis. But yeah, but the reality is, I think, and I think also a lot of people, go into meetings with people maybe not preparing for it, or thinking that they could just wing it. But I always, if I work with people, I make sure that I'm as prepared as I can. I know like what we're going to talk about, and like I try to learn as much as possible before the session. I think people appreciate that too. So even simple things, but I'll say that when I got into tutoring, like I'm definitely not a natural like teacher or speaker, or like I don't naturally sell myself to people. Like I'm very introverted, and like to like be in my own little space. And it definitely was a skill I grew over time. So like I feel like if I can do it through practice, like anybody can cultivate that skill, because it definitely did not come naturally to me at all. So
Yeah, I love that, and that's the secret to so many things in life, isn't it? Put ourselves out there, step outside our comfort zone, and force ourselves to put in the repetitions, and we can overcome most of those things. I can relate to what you said as well as not coming prepared. And I'm sure you can see the guitars behind me. A couple of my kids play guitar, and I took one some lessons years ago. And he got very, very frustrated after a while because it didn't feel like he was going through a course and making a progression. It felt like he was turning up for a series of small workshops, because he'd turn up each week and the tutor like, oh, this week we're going to do blah. And then there was never any continuity. There was never. And he was like, I've practiced this piece, or I've practiced this scale this week. Oh, did you? Right, okay. Well, we're going to do this week. So that preparation and turning up prepared and being ready for your students is so key, isn't it? You got any advice for people how they find a good mentor?
yeah, I do. So I think, what I do value is, even though of course it's a business, I do value that sort of initial interaction that's like low stakes and of course like free and whatnot, to sort of, get a sense of needs, and if you think the person might be a good match. And I know if you're someone who's seeking out a tutor or mentor, you may not, have a perfect sense of that, but I think a lot of times people know who they connect with and who they might not, and just sort of use your best judgment. But yeah, if you're somebody seeking it out, I think you should definitely press for maybe like 15 minutes of a discussion, low stakes, and I think any reasonable mentor will be fine with that, especially if it can lead to a long-term relationship. So yeah, so that's one thing. And I would say too that price is a factor, but look for other things too, like their experience, maybe if they have past reviews, things like that, and that's all important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people forget there's a time investment as well. So, if you focus too much necessarily on the cheapest person, but then you invest a lot of time in this with them, you might not be getting that return on your time that you've put in, which is ultimately much more valuable. You're never getting your time back. So you said something interesting a few minutes ago about trying freelancing. What do you see are the benefits for most people of that, and how would you suggest they try it out?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've gotten so many benefits by doing it, even just beyond like the extra income, which is an obvious one. But I think I've learned so many different skills that I wouldn't have even thought to go and learn. I think one of the biggest things for me is, there's this thing in software that makes sense, where people try to do what I call toy projects, like to learn things, and that's great. Like I encourage, building things when you can, but just I've never personally been the kind of person who was able to see some large project through that like I wasn't accountable to anybody for. Just other things would get in the way. So one thing that freelancing does is, if you're doing work with a client, like if the project doesn't get done, you don't get paid. Then there's like a business relationship there. So it literally forces me, to do what needs to be done to help that person, and it keeps me accountable. So that's like one benefit, but also keeping your skill sets sharp, and and learning like sales skills that are now actually necessary, and even in the regular job market. But yeah, huge benefits to doing it. And if you're wondering how to get started, like if you don't know anybody yet, you could start with one of the platforms. Like there are ones like Upwork and CodeMentor, and there's a tutoring platform. There are tutoring platforms too if you want to get started with that. But yeah, just getting started. You don't have to be a certified teacher to get started. That is one of the good things about not being that regulated. So
Yeah, I think you're totally right on the broad skills as well, because it's so easy to focus just on our technical skills, isn't it? We're going to become a better coder, we're going to be a better architect, we're going to get better at system design, and then forget all about the soft skills, which are important. And as you say, I often speak about software engineers should learn to sell. And I don't necessarily mean you need to go down a used car lot and sell used cars. I mean, we need to sell ideas. We need to sell a vision. We need to sell our team on why we need to pick this technology over that technology, or why we need to pay technical debt now versus building the next feature. All of those things are selling. Now, maybe you're selling what you're going to focus on. Maybe you're selling a vision. Maybe you're selling where we spend our time as a team. Maybe you're saying that we're going to invest in this process, or we're going to invest in doing trunk-based development or something. It's all selling to people. It's all getting people to buy into something and exchange their time for something that you want to do. So I think it's so useful to focus on those soft skills and build them up and get some real world experience of them and become more rounded as software engineers.
yeah, and too, where one of the biggest areas of most people's careers where they have to sell themselves that they may not think about is if you're in a role and you want to get promoted into the next role, pretty much, your entire interaction, say with a manager, one-on-one meetings, you sort of not only do you have to accomplish the work, but you have to help them understand, like kind of sell why the work you're doing is valuable, what impact it's having, why you might deserve that next level or a raise or whatever you're going in for. And that's not something that I really understood when I started in the workplace after school. I've always was always kind of like an academic, so there are a lot of differences between what you do in school versus in the workplace or in the business world.
Yeah, at school it was so easy, wasn't it? You get good grades, everyone see your grades. There's maybe a table in your class of how are you doing, and everyone can see your names at the top or whatever it is. Where now, your boss is busy, they're focused on their own things, they're worried about their own stuff, they're worried about their own career, they're worried about whatever deliveries they've got to account for. They're not necessarily that worried about you. And even if they're doing their best to be, they've still got their own concerns to focus on. So if you can make it easy and you can come along and be prepared and say, this is what I've achieved, this is what I've done, these are my wins. Even more easy if you can, and I talked about this a little while back, send them a little weekly email. These are the couple of wins I've had this week. Because you're reminding them of your wins, but also if you talk to them a little bit in your one-to-ones, you can encourage them to say, take my wins, take Bob's wins, take Sue's wins, and put it all together and pick out the top 5, send it to your boss. If this is my team's wins for this week, because then you're making your boss look good.
Right. And yeah, and it has that double effect there of helping your manager know what you do, that maybe their management know what you do, and it makes them look good. And then in addition to that, even like let's say you have, your eyes in other jobs in the job market, it helps you craft your resume. Like what did you do that was impactful? So it has this like quadruple benefit of, just trying, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Like you don't have to know the exact percentages of what you did, but as long as you convey your impact, that's really valuable.
Yeah, and a lot of people struggle with that, don't they? Say, well, how do I know what the impact of my work was? And I kind of feel that that's the wrong question. The question really is, why don't you know what the impact of your work is? Because you should be asking, okay, we're going to do this feature. Why are we doing this feature? What does good look like for this feature? How is it going to help us with the business objectives? Oh, right, having this feature will has landed at $1 million in new customers because X company has said they'll sign up and they'll pay $1,000 a month for it. Right, I now know the business impact. Now I know why we're doing this feature. And again, if you want to have those conversations of we should pay down technical debt versus feature development, you need to be able to have that conversation with people saying, oh, this feature looks cool. What value is it adding? Why are we doing it? What's the driver behind it? And that helps you, as you say, quantify what impact you've had. It helps the team discuss prioritization and figure out which feature do we do versus do we pay off technical debt. And again, if you've asked those questions, you can say, well, this feature will help us win a customer that will generate $1 million. But this technical debt is causing us $2 million of churn. Why don't we address this issue and fix churn first? Because that will keep the sales guys happy. And again, you'll get buy-in from the rest of the team and the management team if you can talk about those. So yeah, you're right. It's useful on so many levels, isn't it?
Yeah, and especially in fields like software where, one of the reasons I had initially got into it was because, I had sort of that time and space to think of a lot of things like by myself and kind of like putting my creative energy into that. And people don't often talk about sort of like the business piece that has to go into that and making sure that what you're doing is impactful because not only is that important for like communicating your value to management and things, but also, understanding like how critical is your role like at this company? Does it contribute to their bottom line, or is it just kind of an experimental thing that they could just say no, thank you at any time? So it's helpful to understand that too.
Yes, and the climate we've had over the last couple of years, it's good to know whether you're a revenue driver or a cost center, isn't it? Because if you're one of those cost centers, yeah, keep those interviewing skills and keep that resume polished.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. That because there's a bit of a segue there from what we were just talking about into, when justifying your role and justifying what we do. The CEO of Shopify shared a memo yesterday, I believe, that I believe we've both seen and you've commented on. And in there, he said, every new hire now you have to justify why AI cannot do the role.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, to say the, I mean, it's definitely an interesting memo, and of course the reason that I posted the memo because I like when people can form their own opinions by looking at the firsthand primary source. But I think that to me it is just a fundamental misunderstanding of the research that people do before like going up to their management and saying we need another person. I think on most of these teams, people understand that AI is a capability. And if they thought that AI could do something, then they wouldn't have asked in the first place to have, a new hire on the team. So to me, that's almost kind of like insulting the capabilities of the people on the team. But also, I think the more important thing with that memo is that creating a policy like that, I think kind of um, eliminates responsibility to like sort of educate people like why AI might be valuable and kind of more trying to work with others, figuring out when it makes sense instead of just saying, well, you're nervous about AI, so we'll just like make a policy like forcing you to use it, whether or not it's a good thing. Um, I like to jump in. I like to experiment with it. I want to learn and be on top of it, but I can understand why people have their hesitations. And I think, part of the job of a company, if they see their employees are hesitant to work with something, is to try to, work with them and that kind of thing. So yeah, so I was just very surprised by kind of the mandate form of that overall. What was your
Yeah,
view
I
on it?
thought, I thought it was strange because I appreciate it's a memo, it's quite high level, but I was curious of how do you prove that AI can't do this job?
Yeah, it's not
How
an
how
easy
am I going
question.
to demonstrate that, particularly when there's so many people believe AI is capable of rational thought and we're on the edge of AGI? How do I prove that what exists at the moment cannot do this job? How do I counter somebody that says, "Oh well, there's a new model out every couple of months. It will be in 2 months before you've hired that person."
No, yeah. I mean,
I don't think it's actually possible to prove that.
yeah. I mean, a lot of the reason, a lot of hiring decisions and things like that are based on kind of what you think the future might bring, but that you don't necessarily know yet. And that's sort of the point, right? Is that if you had to show that whether AI could do it, then that implies you would have to know like how to go about that. And you don't often know that yet. So yeah, so I agree with you. It was definitely strange. I'm curious where it will go. I mean, maybe, and I can see their viewpoint of like maybe why they had the policy. Like they kind of just like want people to start who might be hesitant to explore it, and I can understand that perspective. But yeah, I think the kind of the way of going about that, I'm curious to see how it'll unfold in the future.
Yeah, I think it's failing myself. We've got so many studies. If you go and look at good studies on leadership and business and management, I dare I commit the sacrilege of suggesting get an MBA or something, they will all talk about leadership, and ultimately they'll bring it back to a carrot and a stick. And motivating people, particularly that intrinsic motivation, if you can spark it, is always way more successful than forcing people. So the kind of stick approach, it just seems this is a failing of a CEO. They should be presenting that vision. Look at this bright future we can achieve if we leverage AI. And here's some tools. We're going to create a Shopify university that will teach each team how to leverage AI. Let's talk about the great things we can do it. Here are some wins we've had in this. Here's Bob from accounts. Here's Sue from customer service. This is their Loom talk or something, how they've leveraged AI, what benefits it's bringing, what they learned from the process, what you can leverage to kind of stand on the shoulders of giants, so to speak, and move forward with that. Instead, it's a stick. It's like you must use it or else.
Yeah, and
So
I think another thing that was missing from that memo is like what exactly led to this? Like what problem is it solving to put out this policy? Like what, where people like why was it an issue that not enough people are using it? Like if I even saw something small like that, I think it would have been interesting to see like what was the thinking behind it instead of just, AI is coming out and you better use it. Like that's kind of what I got out of it.
yeah, and I remain very cynical when you see Anthropic are talking about software engineers we placed, but they're still hiring them. It's going to take them 6 months to fill most of their open roles. But if we're not going to need software engineers in 6 months' time, why are they still hiring them? Salesforce said they don't need any more software engineers. Last time I looked, they still had 1,200 open vacancies on their website. So it starts to undermine trust, I think, and undermine their credibility. At least as somebody as a software engineer looking at that, thinking, well, do I want to work for these companies that claim that? Do I want to work for these companies that are so inauthentic and are putting out this hype? Have they thought through these policies, or are they just knee-jerk reactions to the marketplace? And if they're knee-jerking that, is everything else just going on a kind of, the wind's blowing that way today, we'll run over there? Is it going to be chaotic and one of these dynamic environments where everything is a death march because you're running around chasing the latest whim?
Oh, right. And I totally agree. And I, and along with a lot of other people I know, have definitely seen a shift over the last few years of, this sort of mentality that, there seems to be a lot more like mandating of things. And, you see that too with like work location, like mandates of like being in the office or being remote. But yeah, I think people just need to like communicate better and more frequently and like, leadership down and just like people within companies. I think that would solve a lot of those problems. And I know it's easier said than done, but
Yeah, I still find it's interesting that we mandate this return to office for creativity and the ability to work together, and because you can't build something remote. But then I can point at MySQL, which was one of the first billion-dollar tech companies, sold back in 2008, 2009, I think, built entirely from scratch, fully remote for over 10 years. So they were built from scratch, fully remote, when people were still using slow dial-up modems. There's no video conferencing. You could barely do voice over IP on those slow modems. But they did it. They managed to get collaboration, build a worldwide team, and build a billion-dollar business. So it feels a little bit strange that we think we can't do that these days with this so much better video conference we've got, all the collaboration tools we've got.
yeah, and even more recently, like in the last 5 years, I mean, just as recently as about 5 years ago, not only was remote work being done, but it was sort of a lot of companies had to scramble to do it on not ideal conditions, and even then, companies still got things done, and people were employed and things were okay. Like maybe they weren't perfect because of the way that it happened, but it's amazing that that happened so recently, and then now, a lot of people seem to say, oh, it can't work, like it's not, but it did even as recently as like 4 or 5 years ago. So I find that interesting, and I think to me it's about like choice and having the autonomy to do where you do work best, and to me it's as simple as that. But yeah.
Yeah, and the other strange thing I find is, I've worked in a few very large enterprises, and we talk about remote work doesn't work, but I think I did in-office remote work. A lot of these big enterprises, I was in an office here. Part of the team was in another office 600 miles away. Another part of the team was in an office on a different continent 4,000 miles away. So we were doing in-office remote work, and that worked. And I'm sure that a lot of these big tech companies that are going back to in-office work, I've still got distributed teams. So they'll be in-office remote. It's not really changing that much. Anyway, we can't put the world to right. We can't change all of that.
Yeah.
We've talked for a while. I think to kind of wrap this up and bring it to a conclusion, you have, I think, your own mentoring scheme called Career Code Pro. Tell us a little bit about that, Eric, and how do you help
Yeah.
people? How can they reach out?
Yeah, so that's my LLC. So I have a website, careercodepro.com. I also have LinkedIn where the handle is Career Code Pro with those spaces. But yeah, I love to work with you, especially if you're either someone who's interested in getting into software or somebody who wants collaboration on a project. I'm happy to talk with you, and if anything I do can help. So. Yeah, pleasure chatting, and yeah, it was great.
Hi. Thanks so much, Eric.